Ladies and gentlemen, if you are at all confused on how to set up the suspension on your mountain bike, this video is for you. We basically took a master class and we watered it down to a roughly 15-minute 101. This is air suspension for mountain bikes, how to set up everything: fork, rear shock, sag/pressure, rebound, and compression. This video is presented by Liam. He is our head mechanic at Worldwide Cyclery. He is an absolutely phenomenal mechanic and knows a ton about suspension setup. This stuff is complicated. It's a little dry sometimes, but it is very, very valuable because having properly set up suspension can make or break how your bike handles and feels, which then can make you have a lot more fun or a lot less fun when you're riding your mountain bike out on the trails. Take a look right here. This whole video is broken out into chapters that are time-stamped, which you can also see down in the video description. So if you just want to go to something like compression or rear shock or fork, whatever, it's all right there so you can click through to it. Enjoy.
So when setting up your suspension, sag is the easiest starting point. When you get the sag, we need to measure how much you're sitting into the bike, and fork and shock have different percentage ratios. So on the fork, we're looking around 15 to 20% of sag, and on the rear shock, it's gonna be 25 to 30% of sag. Now, setting the sag to that measurement is really important. If you have too much or too little, it's gonna change how your bike rides. If you have too much, meaning you're sitting into the bike too far, you'll be really squishy, not really getting the full benefits of the bike. You'll be bottoming out a lot on stuff you really shouldn't bottom out on. And if you have not enough sag, meaning your suspension isn't going into the travel far enough, you'll be kind of harsh, you'll never be bottoming out. If you're riding steep stuff, your rear shock won't be sitting into the bike. You'll be constantly kind of feeling like you're going over the bars, and that won't create confidence. So getting the sag on both the front and rear and the balance is really important. So tools you will need is some type of measuring device. I have a ruler here, I have a pair of micrometer or calipers here, and a tape measure. Any of them work, but make sure you're just kind of keeping it consistent and measuring with the same tool every time you set up sag. All right, so we're gonna start with the rear shock, and once we get the rear shock sag, we're gonna look for 30%. Per Yeti's manufacturer recommendations, we're looking for about 18 millimeters of stroke on this shock. For sag, that's about 30%. So also on the Yeti setup guide, that puts me at about 152 PSI for this rear shock, and that's what we're gonna go to start out for our sag. 152 right there. Anytime you're adding or removing pressure from a front or rear shock, you're gonna wanna equalize the positive and negative air chambers. By doing so, you just push down the shock a little bit, and there's a transfer port, and that'll help equalize both chambers. All right, so we're gonna measure our sag on our rear shock. You're gonna wanna find something solid to lean up against if you're sitting on your own. If you have a buddy, have him hold you up, but I'm on my own here, so I'll be using this wall, and yeah, we'll get on it. I actually need pedals on this bike. Adam, can you bring me pedals? So you sit down, give the bike a couple bounces, and then I'm gonna sit down, and then you reset your O-ring. So push this O-ring all the way back against the shock seal, and then you're gonna wanna gently get off without adding too much movement to the bike. So sitting for me, I can just easily hop off, and now I have my sag. Now I'm gonna measure the sag. I have my micrometer set at 18 millimeters, which is the 30% for this rear shock. So we're gonna come in here, and we're exactly at that 18 millimeters. So that's perfect amount of sag per Yeti's recommendations. Now we'll move on to setting the sag on the fork. Same thing as the rear shock, except we're gonna be measuring it in a different millimeters because it has 170 mil of travel. So per Fox's recommendations on the fork, for about 15% of sag, we're gonna be looking at 26 millimeters of sag. Or if we're looking at 20% of sag, we're gonna be looking at 34 millimeters of sag. I know that's confusing, I'll explain it in a little bit. So also per Fox recommendations and Yeti's, I'm gonna be looking right around 82 to 84 PSI on this front fork, and that should give me about that 20% sag number that I'm looking for on this bike. All right, so attach the shock pump, and we're looking for 82, 84 PSI. So 82.5, but remember we need to equalize the positive and negative chambers on this. So give it a couple pushes, nice and slow. So we're 83 PSI, just in between that 82 and 84 that Fox recommended. So we'll pop off the shock pump and give it a measure. All right, so now that we have the pressure set, we're gonna be measuring sag. Same way we did on the rear shock, but on the fork now. Hop on the bike, get up against something stable. Let off the brakes. There's a pro tip. Let off the brakes when you're setting sag. Give it a couple bounces. Sit down because I'm setting it the same every time. Push down the O-ring, and then gently, without pressure, jump off the bike. Grab this guy. All right, so now we're looking for about 26 to 34. I'm actually running it right around 28 millimeters on this guy. And that's gonna put me right around 18% or so on fork sag. And I'm right at that on my 83 PSI. So now we have sag set front and rear. It's time to move on to rebound settings and why that's important. Setting up rebound, you can tell we have it too slow right here. It takes a long time to return. You want it pretty much as fast as possible without the rear wheel kind of bouncing off the ground. So if I open it up all the way, it's all the way closed right now, which is slow. If I go all the way open, which is gonna be super fast, the rear wheel will probably bounce up and down. So as you can tell, that's too fast. That'll buck you off chumps. So we're gonna find the middle ground. And for myself, on the rear shock pressure that I have, the high speed rebound and a low speed rebound is gonna be a little different. And we'll find out what that number is once we get to them. All right, so based on the Yeti website recommendations, as well as the Fox recommendations, for 152 rear PSI that I'm on, my low speed rebound, which is this adjustment here on the X2, I wanna be 14 clicks out from fully closed. So that's a little bit of a confusing topic on compression and rebound. So you're counting clicks from fully closed, always. That's what I do. And the same thing, you just wanna make sure you're consistent. So fully closed is clockwise, like you're screwing the bolt all the way into the shock. So we're fully closed right here, and we wanna count out 14 clicks. So that's 1. All right, so 14 clicks out. That should be about my starting point for my low speed rebound. And as you can tell, that's a pretty good middle ground for this PSI. So this particular Float X2 shock actually has a high speed rebound and a low speed rebound adjustment. We will now be adjusting the high speed rebound adjustment right here. Most shocks will actually only have one rebound adjustment. So it'll be the same setup, but you'll only be moving one of the red knobs and not two. But for the Float X2, per the Yeti setup, I wanna be 4 clicks out from closed. So we're at fully closed right now, so I wanna count out 4 clicks. Just like that. And what high speed rebound does is it helps control kind of the end stroke rebound. So on big hits or harder jumps, when you're kind of getting into the bike in the travel more, it allows it to not return so fast and kind of keeps you controlled. Low speed handles the lower velocity hits, while high speed rebound is the higher velocity hits. So low speed, slow undulations, normal stuff. High speed, big hard hits, big hard G-outs, and kind of, you know, something you might want to go on a slightly slower side so you don't get bucked out of control on a big landing. So going to adjust the rebound on the fork, same thing as the rear shock, except the fork rebound is going to be at the bottom of the fork, and we're looking for the same thing. So based on Fox recommendations, I want to be 8 clicks out on my high speed rebound and 9 clicks out on my low speed rebound. And the Fox fork with a grip to damper does have that high speed, low speed, If you're using a grip damper or a RockShox or any other brand, you usually only have one rebound adjustment. So it'll be the same thing, but you'll be moving one knob instead of two knobs. And they're actually labeled now. So if you have a first gen grip 2, they might not be labeled, but they are labeled now. So our high speed rebound is this top larger knob, and our low speed is this bottom knob. So my high speed rebound, I want to be 8 clicks out from fully closed. So I'm going to fully close down high speed. So both knobs turn together, don't worry about that. We'll just move this high speed knob and the low will go with it. So fully closed, 8 clicks out. And there's 8. Same thing with the low speed. We'll close this all the way down. See how they move independently now? 2 different circuits. So low speed's all the way closed, and we'll go 9 out on this. All right, so now I'm 8 and 9, and that should be a really good starting point as well. And again, these are all starting points, and we're just getting the basics down. So go ahead and put your cap back on. So now that we've done the adjustment, you can give it a quick test, and just be mindful, this is not a good test, but you can just see kind of you're close in the range. So give it a couple compressions. And from my first feeling of that, on what they said, it's a touch fast. But I would give that a first try at the baseline settings before you make any adjustments. And then you can go into adjusting stuff and slowing it down. And especially on this Grip 2 damper, only do 1 click at a time if you do happen to make any rebound or compression adjustment changes. But for now, we're gonna leave that as far as the basic setup goes. And we'll move on to compression settings, why it's important, and how we're gonna adjust them. All right, so jumping into compression. So compression is an adjustment that controls how fast your shaft speed moves. So while air pressure controls where you sit on the bike as well as your air ramp up, compression does shaft speed. So on this rear shock, we have a Float X2, we have a high speed compression and a low speed compression. Again, similar to Rebound, your high speed compression is for bigger hits, square edge hits, rock gardens, really stuff that's kind of coming up on the trail fast, where low speed is a little bit more like rollers, berms, kind of when you're sitting on the bike. So you have 2 adjustments, and we're gonna adjust both of them according to the Yeti settings on the Fox X2. So on your Float X2 rear shock, you have a high speed adjustment and a low speed adjustment. Your high speed is gonna be controlled and adjusted by the 6mm Allen, while your low speed is gonna be inside of there and controlled by your 3mm Allen. I know on my high speed compression adjustment, I'm looking at 5 clicks out from fully closed. So I'm gonna close down my 6mm. All right, so I'm fully closed there, and I wanna be 5 out. All right, so 5 out there on my high speed, and I wanna be 12 out on my low speed. So we'll close this all the way down, and we'll back it out 12 clicks. And there's 12. So that should be pretty good starting base point on my rear shock for compression settings. Now let's go do compression settings on the fork. All right, so our fork compression settings are very similar. And on the Fox Grip 2 damper, we have a high speed, which is the blue knob, and the low speed, which is a black knob. Again, when you turn the high speed, the low speed also moves. But when you turn the low speed, the high speed does not. So we're gonna come in and make my adjustment. I know from already looking at the setup guide, I wanna be 7 out on my high speed and 12 out on my low speed. So I'm gonna fully close down my high speed and back it out 7 clicks. And on my low speed, I wanna do the same. I'm gonna close it all the way down and back it out 12. All right, so now we did both our high speed and our low speed adjustment, and now we're ready to give it a little test, and then we'll move on to kind of the final tips and tricks that we'll address with sag. So now you've gone through sag setup, rebound setup, and compression setup. Now you're ready to go give it a test ride and see if you're kind of close, it feels great, you're maybe a little bit far away, and you need to make some adjustments. The first thing you wanna do is go to a trail near your home or where you normally ride, and hit a section of trail that you know well is easily repeatable and you can kind of do laps on. It might have a little bit of turns, drops, rocks, jumps, whatever. Main thing is just to do it consistently every time with the same amount of effort. The next thing you want to do is bring a little notepad. So every time you make an adjustment to the compression, the rebound, or bring a shock pump and change the PSI, take a little note down, make sure you know which way you're going and what adjustment you made. That way you know if it felt better or worse, you can go back to the previous setting. Some more tips you want to do is always keep your suspension clean after rides. So clean suspension is happy suspension. After every ride, you just kind of want to go through, grab a clean microfiber and kind of wipe down the stanchions and the steels. And by doing so, you'll keep everything moving kind of really smoothly, keep the dust from getting too far in those seals, and it'll actually help your suspension last longer. So anytime you kind of get lost also on your suspension adjustment, you might be turning too many dials one way or you can't get all your travel, just restart. Just go back to the beginning of this video, restart and kind of do it all over again. And I can't stress enough, make some notes. Always bring a notepad with you, keep one in your car, keep one in your riding pack. This is kind of your field notes and it's gonna be your helpful starting guide. And 6 months from now, if your suspension doesn't feel good or you get it serviced and they happen to change your settings, you have reference on where you were and you don't have to fully restart. So let us know in the comments what you liked about this video, what we could include, and on the next video, we'll be diving much deeper into bracketing, volume tokens, and kind of advanced suspension setup tips.